without further ado, I want to introduce our guest presenter today. I'm so excited about this. Sometimes the messenger is just as important as the message. And for many farmers, peer-to-peer networking and education is the key to increasing the adoption of conservation practices. David Brandt of Walnut Creek Farms from Carroll, Ohio, began no-till farming in 1971 and planted his first cover crop in 1978 to control erosion on poorly drained, hilly clay soils. David was influenced by early cover crop advocates Steve Groff and Gabe Brown. Both men inspired David to try greater array of cover crop species and options. David and his family have hosted people from all over the world at their annual field day on their farm for the past 37 years. He has worked with Dr. Eisman from the Pinkton Research Station of Ohio State University and has delegations from Ukraine to China visiting his farm. I first found David on YouTube several years ago, and what has made an impression on me is no matter who he was talking with, whether it was presenting to an international governmental delegation or a farmer down the road, you got the same information. David has the ability to take pertinent scientific information and deliver it in a way that we can all understand. David and his family own Walnut Creek Seeds, which is a source of over 50 species of cover crop seeds. Their services also include the ability to clean and package cereal grains, among others. And there's some information up at the table if you're interested in that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Brandt.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. It's a pleasure to be here. After all that, I might as well just get in the car and go back home because there's really nothing more to say, about. So Sue asked me to talk this morning about basics of soil health, how to start, how to get things done, and I kind of have to go back because we did the basics a lot of times, and now we're a lot farther down the road. So I am. This is a picture of our farm. That's fine. What I'm showing you there is that, a prophet in his own land never gets anywhere because all our neighbors are still conventional tillers, as you can see. And this is a picture of our farm in December. We attempt every year to have every acre of our soils covered, whether it's rented land or our own personal land that we own. The basic farmstead is what you see there. You can't see the house among the trees, but we have 2 hoop houses that we grow some vegetables in for farmers markets. Back 10 or 15 years ago when I was more youthful. The next building with the green roof is a machine shop turned into a seed warehouse. The other 3 buildings were hog buildings that we utilized when we was on the farm. We had about 90 sows there till we lost all the packers in Ohio, and then didn't have enough pigs to fill a semi, and nobody was interested. So now we're out of the hog business, other than what we sell for a few for residential people that we like really well. And then the big white roof building is our cleaning shed, which is a new addition in 3 years ago. So we actually clean and process seeds on the farm. We're operating about 1,000 acres presently. We have a corn, bean, wheat rotation. So our rotation starts out with, especially on a new farm, depends on where we pick it up. If it had soybeans on it, we'll try to get a cover crop in it first, and that cover crop would be probably buckwheat, because we understand buckwheat will help bring some nutrients to the surface because of the fine root system of the buckwheat. And can be in. But here was a problem we had. This is a neighbor's farm that does conventional tillage, and this is what his fields look like every spring. My biggest concern is if we're not going to be proactive and we don't correct some of these problems, and you've heard a lot about algae blooms in Lake Erie. Our water goes to the Ohio River down to Mississippi, so we're really not concerned about the algae bloom in Lake Erie, but I am. Because I've worked closely with the governor. I've worked really closely with state EPA and national EPA. I know both the chairmen of the state and the federal level. And I know if we happen to have a major algae bloom in Lake Erie, the rules is already written by EPA that there will be no phosphorus sold to farmers if their soil samples read 30 parts per million phosphorus or higher. So, we need to keep being proactive on that, because if it happens, it's going to be mandated. We won't be able to buy the kind of nutrients we need to buy if you're trying to buy nutrients to farm with. Next slide, please. So basically, we're going to start out real simple. How do we build soil health? Well, you can do a lot of things. There's a lot of things on the market today. What I call bugs in a jug, they'll help the first year. Because as we look at a conventional farm that does a lot of tillage, most of the soils are pretty well wore out. Most of the soils have no fungi in them because of doing tillage. You put oxygen in the soil, which means the critters in the soil get more active, so it breaks up the fungi. And the fungi is like a spider web. If you've seen spider webs, you break them down. That's what it looks like in the soil. They're a web that actually works in the soil to bring nutrients to the crops we're trying to produce. So as we till these, we break them up, they evaporate through the air that you put in the soil, goes back up in the atmosphere, and we lose them. So to most about all the farms today that's conventional tilled, I'm going to call highly bacteria driven. And when we're talking about highly bacteria driven, most of these soils will have between 40 and 60 million bacteria and 0 fungi, 0 nematodes, and 0 other things that I can't even pronounce. But those are the critters that we need to make soil health come alive. So we have to do things to bring it on. So first we have to learn to reduce the tillage or totally eliminate tillage if you want to start building soil health. So you need to move to no-till. The next thing we need to do is think about how we can get these crops to grow better. So we like to start in, if you have corn in the rotation and you're going to soybeans, we like to talk about rye. Rye happens to be the easiest cover crop you can establish. It probably does the most to protect the soil. It's a fine root. It has the largest window of application. You can run rye from August till Thanksgiving. Now, you're not going to see much at Thanksgiving. It don't have much time to grow till the ground gets froze. It's probably froze up here by Thanksgiving. In our area, it's just getting cold enough to do that. But if you do get it out Thanksgiving, you get a couple warm days, you'll see a little red, rusty stem sticking out of the ground, and you'll think, I spent my money wrongly, but no, you didn't. Once it snows, that plant will actually grow all through the winter. When the snow melts, it'll probably be 3 or 4 inches tall. So as we can do this, we put the roots there, and what this rye does in the soil, it actually pulls the nitrogen out of the water profile, stores it in its roots. So when you plant the soybean thinks it doesn't have enough nitrogen. Soybean is a legume, so it takes the nitrogen from the atmosphere, which is 75% nitrogen. And I don't know why we don't use more of it, and eventually I think we will. But we're going to let that rye pull that nitrogen out of the water profile or out of the solution, make the soybean put more nodules on. So what it does, it puts more nodes, it puts more flowers. It may only be between knee and waist high, it won't be armpit high, because it's making a lot of food value for the seed it's going to produce. Then come about the 15th of July to the 1st of August, it's going to release that nitrogen, store it as an organic form of N that the soybean can utilize, which will increase the soybean yield by about 3 or 4 bushel per acre more than if you're just doing it conventionally. The neat thing about rye is we can hold the soil where it belongs. If we think about soil and how it moves because we don't have infiltration. We have an infiltration problem. We don't have a water runoff problem. If it was infiltrate, we wouldn't have it running off. So I'm looking at this rye as one way to curb erosion. So according to NRCS, the national soil loss for the United States is 5.2 ton. So if we could put that rye after corn and cut that loss by 2 tons per acre, this means when we plant those soybeans, we have saved 23 pounds of nitrogen, we've saved 32 pounds of phosphorus, we saved about 60 pounds of potash that didn't leave from that 2 ton of soil. You know. So guess what that means? I don't have to buy as much nutrient to get those beans to grow. Now your agronomists don't like to hear me tell you that, especially if he works for a fertilizer company, you know. But this is how we start soil health. With these roots, we can control that. We're also going to start building some other things that happen. We will see earthworms come back, which will help in infiltration, which will help move nutrients up and down. You know, one earthworm casting that you've seen on top of the ground, if you've looked down and seen the earthworm hole, there's a casting there, and that's the excrement from the earthworm. And that is high in phosphorus. So if you have 5 or 6 phosphorus per square foot, guess what? You got another 15 or 20 pounds of phosphorus available to your plants just from those earthworms. And also the new soybean or the corn plant finds those earthworm roots or channels, and that's where the roots grow, you know. So this is one nice way to get started. And you could also put the bug in the jug the first year if you want to, but after that you don't need to, because you've already started the system to work. Now, you can't build soil and build soil health in 1 year. It's going to take a series of 5 or 6 years, and you're going to have to be content with doing this. Because if you do this and you run a tillage tool to go to corn the next year, you went right back to zero, right back where you started from. Because once you added that oxygen in that soil, you've broken down everything you've started. Next slide, please. So here we are planting soybeans. I personally like rye that's chest high. You know, it works really well through the planter. This happens to be a Kraus drill without a fluted coulter. You know, it works real well. The corn planter works well. There's not a piece of equipment manufactured in the last 7 or 8 years that you can't no-till with, because they made the frames heavy enough. They've got good metering systems on them. You know, then we could go in afterwards like this, use a crop roller, especially since you'll see the heads here. There's white pollen there, or orange pollen coming off of that, depends on the variety of the rye. And you roll it down, and we can save 1 chemical pass. Because we know if it's in that stage, we can kill it. If you're in a field of rye and you walk in it and it sounds like you're popping popcorn when you step on the rye, that's the time you want to start rolling. You know. Next slide. This just happened to be an overview picture. This was a drone that my grandson had. And here we planted a rye and rolled it. And here we didn't roll the rye because we were trying to do an experiment to see, do we have to roll the rye? Well, the answer is yes. Because the only place, if you was on the farm today, the only place you'll see soybeans growing where this drill's running in that pass is where the duals of the tractor run. Because what we did to let the rye spring back up, we harvested 25 bushel of seed rye off of that plot. So we got 25 bushel of rye, and we got some soybeans growing. But they're not enough to brag about, but was something we tried. So we found out we had to have the rye laying down to be successful, you know. Next slide. I'm going to change gears a little bit. We're talking about corn, but you know, I think rye is the most easiest form of cover crop we can use to get you started, to get used to it, because we're all used to brown. You know, we're all used to brown. And when you put something green out there, you begin to wonder, you know, you start losing sleep at night. Can I get it planted? You know, when do I kill it? Well, if you're not very comfortable with it, you can kill it when it's short. But the trouble is when you kill it short, it only lasts about 30 days and the residue's gone because it had a lot of water in it. When you let it get taller, it has more lignin in it, it stays longer. So we have to cover more long. If you're moving towards organic, we need to up the seeding rate, because the only way we can suppress weeds in organic is have enough biomass there to last 300 days out of the year. If not, the weeds are going to come through it. You know. So this is some of the simple things that I think works really well. If you're using it as a conventional farmer and not organic, I think 30 or 40 pound of rye per acre is ideal with a drill. If you're going to broadcast it, probably 60 to 70 pounds is ideal for broadcast, because about 20% of it is not going to grow if you just throw it out on top of the ground. Mainly because the ducks and the geese and the blackbirds come eat half the seed. You know. So there's some things to look at. As we look at crimson clover and rye, I really love this plant. This plant does the same thing that soybeans does for corn. It captures nitrogen, puts it in the root profile. It has roots about 9 or 10 inches deep. You know, right now a lot of the farms have like 3 layers of tillage compaction. 20 years ago everybody was plowing. So about 9 or 10 inches deep, we got a compacted layer from the plow. You know, 10 years ago we went to a chisel plow. They all said they went deeper than the plow. They didn't. But they made another hard pan about 6 inches deep. You know, and all of a sudden everybody's buying what they call vertical tillage tools that run about 2 inches deep. You can run 20 miles an hour, get a lot done every day. Now we got a layer at 2 inches. So we have to have roots that's going to break through some of these hard pans and come along. And this is 6 pounds of crimson clover. If you're close to a city and you have a farmer's market, and this happens to be May the 15th, and you like to bend over and make flower arrangements or cut flowers off, you put 25 of these in a bundle. You get $10 a bundle at the farmer's market. If you're wise enough to cut enough, you can pay for half your cover crop. You know, people like them. It's another way to help look at diversity. You know, what we're doing is we're talking about making your soil building practices or soil health practices. As you build things, you have to have diversity in the soil to build soil health. So this would be like 2 years down the road. You went to the rye, you went to soybeans. The next year you can use this in the fall. This will be your second cover crop. Now you're really starting to build your soil health. You got some rye mixed with it, you know, and you move on from 1 to 2 to 3 species and then go up to whatever you're comfortable with, you know. Next slide, please. Some innovative things we did back in 92, let's see, it was 98 when I met Steve Groff. He brought the tillage reddish to me. He says, David, we've just figured this thing out. You're a big no-tiller. We'd like to have you do some research for us. So we were able to purchase a white planter in 98. Because I went to the dealer and I said, I need a planter that'll plant corn, soybeans, small grains, and cover crop. Of course, I love John Deere, so I went there first. The dealer looked at me and he says, get out of my office. He said, I'll sell you a planter, a drill, and some kind of broadcast seeder to do all else you want. I said, no, I just want one piece of equipment, you know. So I went to the white dealer, and he's about 100 miles away. They never met him. And he's a big fellow like I am. And I says, I want this thing to do corn, soybeans, small grains, cover crop. He says, I can't do that, David, but here's the phone number of our planter engineer at White. He says, call him up. He says, if you and him can work it out, I'll sell it to you. You know. So we worked together with White, come up with a reddish plate, which happened to end up to be a sugar beet plate. After 4 months of trials and errors, all winter long, drilling holes in plastic plates and trying to figure out. We figured it out. I went to the dealer. His brother was from Michigan. I showed him what I'd done. He says, we'll get it. His brother says, well, that's the same high size hole as a small sugar beet plate. Why didn't you tell him that? You know, he said, well, I didn't know, you know. So spent 4 months for nothing, but we learned a lot. So what we did, we put one row with radishes, and one row that we could plant soybeans, but that happens to be winter pea. And this was planted after wheat. Because we want wheat in the rotation, or I do, because then we can have a cover crop that grows longer than 2 weeks. Because if you think about a corn and bean rotation, You're not done harvesting until about Thanksgiving if you're at our place, you know. And then you're thinking about planting cover crops, you got maybe 2 days before it freezes. So you just barely get it in the ground, or you barely get it up, and then it has to grow in the spring, and you're trying to plant corn the 15th day of May or the 1st of May, you know, so it don't have time to grow, and it don't have very good root systems. So we found out with wheat, we can do this instead of do double crop beans, that we make about 15 bushels the acre on, you know. So what happened here was that our winter peas took nitrogen out of the atmosphere. We found out as we dug, and you have to do this if you're going to build soil health, you have to have a shovel in your truck. You have to get out of that truck and walk in the field and see what's going on, because you can't tell at 50 miles an hour, you know. And as we did the research, we found out that the hair roots of that radish, even though it has an inch tuber, you know, these hair roots went 15 inches over and grew right into the nodule of the soybean, you know. And then as we looked longer, we found out that normal winter peas grown by themselves put on about 6 or 7 nodules, which looks like a small pea, only it's white hooked to the root. When we put radishes in there, we found they were putting 25 and 30 of these things on. So by the radish growing over there and pulling the nitrogen away from the pea, it said we needed more nitrogen to make seed, you know. And in turn, what happened was our radish went from 1 inch in diameter to 3 to 4 inches in diameter, 30 inches deep. A tuber 30 inches deep in the soil would actually break the compaction, you know. And with this, we used 3/4 pound of radishes, which at that point it was like, when I got them from Steve Groff, they was $3 a pound. Now they're about $1.25, $1.50, you know. So we ended up with $1.75 an acre in radishes, because we used 3/4 pound per acre. We put 15 pounds of peas in, which was worth 60 cents a pound at that time. So that's another $6. We had about $9 or $10 an acre in a cover crop, you know. Next slide. Here's what it looks like as they grow. Now, you know, I'm just a farmer, and I can't figure it out very much other than I dig and look. But as we watched, these radishes grew out of the ground, as you can see. You know, you can see the soil being moved. You know, now they're in a row, and you can actually see they're like 4 or 5 inches apart. One seed, just like you plant corn. From Brandt University, which is our farm, by digging, I figured out that that radish, the center one, hit the plow pan at 9 inches deep, because that radish come out of the ground 9 inches. When I dug down to that hard pan, the taproot went through it. Once it got through it, I saw that radish get just as big as it was on the top. So I'm saying we had to get enough weight on that radish to push that taproot through. Interesting thing, I worked with Dr. Lafiq Islam at Piketon. Somehow he sent some interns up to the farm, and they were there for months every day. And he come up with a figure. He says that the taproot of that radish puts 1,500 pounds of pressure in the soil as it grows. No wonder it went through the hard pan. Whether he's right or wrong, I don't know, and I don't care. I just know it goes through the hard pan, you know. But what we ended up with was like this, you know. My first year, you know, this is 2000 or 1998, my first year. I was so tickled. I had these big holes, you know, and I thought, man, what am I going to do? Well, first I thought, in March we had a warm spell. All of a sudden we had 2 fire departments, State Highway Patrol, Columbia Gas sitting there. Where's the gas leak, David? You know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Flashers everywhere, get up. I said, we don't have a gas line within 3 miles of us. Well, it smells like natural gas out here. You know, well, nobody ever seen them before. Nobody ever smelled them before. You know, and I thought, wow, you know. So we had a little conflab there. So when we planted them after 2098, we had to tell the fire department in which fields they were in, so they didn't get a call. Had to notify the deputy sheriffs, you know. Now it's not a problem because everybody's used to it. You know, in 2008, the housing project busted because we were the fastest growing development county in the state. And I thought, man, my radishes did the job. I'm going to be able to farm more land, no more houses, you know. But then I saw this big hole and I thought, man, what am I going to do? You know, if I go there with the corn planter, that corn is going to be 6 inches deep or 10 inches deep. Guess what happened? When this double disc of the seed unit run over that soil collapses in that hole. That soil around that radish, if any of you are familiar with Crocker's Victory Garden, you've seen the pictures. If he holds this soil up, it looks like chocolate cake and it's falling through his fingers. That's exactly how that soil was. You know. The neat thing is, if you notice that soil's been lifted 3 to 4 inches. Guess what? I had a natural strip tillage machine. It was actually put a strip in the field 15, 18 inches deep. You know? What else was I worried about? Well, when this thing decomposed, I thought it was an acid. I said, what am I going to do with all that acid in the soil? It's going to kill everything. Well, we figured out it's not an acid. It's a sugar. So in March, when we dig these holes and find these radishes decomposing, there was like 30 or 40 earthworms in there doing what earthworms do, making more earthworms, you know. I couldn't believe it. They're thick. So it's a good thing, you know. Then we found out for some more research, and I think the next slide will show us that, maybe. No, it didn't. Okay. Well, anyhow, Dr. Papeek did some information. But anyhow, we figured out from that slide there that we had 250 pounds of nitrogen stored in the soil. We had 34 pounds of phosphorus extra stored in the soil. We had 150 pounds more potash in the soil. We had 60 pounds of sulfur. I don't know where the sulfur come from, other than that thing smells so bad, it must be from that, you know. And we had 500 pounds of calcium. Dave Brandt has not spread any lime on his home farm since 1971, and our pH is still 7. Because these cover crops are bringing up enough calcium that we don't need to buy it. You know, go ahead. Oh, rye. So this would be the rye we're looking at. This was a CRP farm. We was able to rent it after it come out of CRP. My NRCS office said the only way you can handle that mass of crap up there, David, is to plow it. Well, in 1978, I sold all my tillage tools, so I wasn't tempted to do tillage. So all I have is a corn planter, a sprayer, and a combine. That's what I got, and some wagons. And he told me that. I said, I ain't going to do it. So I worked with this guy, and about 2 months before it come out of CRP, I went to the NRCS office, and I says, I want to kill that 10-year cover, and I want to plant a cover crop in there that's going to decompose that stuff. Well, David, I don't know whether we can do this. Well, I said, you're going to do it because I'm going to kill it. Well, we're going to take the guy's payment. I says, no, you're not. I says, we're not doing anything. We're not disturbing the soil. We're putting more nutrients in there. Luckily, I knew Terry Cosby. Of course, he was the chief of NRCS in Ohio. I called Terry. I said, Terry, I want to do this. He says, we'll let you do it as a trial basis to show farmers that they can do this without doing tillage. I said, fine. So we put a 10-way species in there. That's what was left. And we planted corn. I think the next picture might be what we're looking at. And there it is. There's how we planted it. We had 42,000 pounds of green biomass on May the 28th, the day we planted the corn. That's 6 inches of thatch, guys and gals. You know, David lost 3 or 4 days of sleep till the corn come up, you know. So next slide. So here we are, and that's our planter. You know, here we're running soybeans with 15-inch rows. We shut the 15-inch rows off and plant 30-inch corn. We plant wheat with that, 15-inch wheat. We plant our cover crops with it. You know, instead of only 350 acres of corn a year, That planter gets almost 2,000 acres put on it every year. Makes a pretty cheap investment. Yes, it wears out the coulters. You know, yes, you have to do some maintenance, but the frame never wears out. You know, next slide. We've done some of this. You know, the university come down to me, Ohio State, they're great people. Dr. Sam Bone was there, he was a corn specialist. He says, David, you can't do this, you can't plant green. You know, you're going to have what they call green bridge effect. Corn's not going to come up, so you need to kill it. So I said, okay, we killed the field. It looked like this. Guess what happened? A day before we was going to plant corn, it rained 4.5 inches of water. Do you know what we planted in that field? We planted wheat, you know, in October. It's the only time it dried out enough. We put that residue dead on there. It couldn't get sunlight. We don't have tile. It's clay soils. It stayed cold. It never got warm enough, never got dry enough to plant till October. A lesson learned from David. We're not going to kill it. We're going to plant green. You know? Go ahead. There's the thatch after it's rolled. You wonder, my goodness, how does the beans get through there? You know, they do. That's 35 pound of rye per acre conventional. That rye was 6.5 foot tall. That's 6,500 pounds of biomass. If I was selling carbon today, which I can't because we've already done it, they won't accept me. But if we do this today on a conventional field, you can collect up to $100 an acre carbon credit if you go to the right sources. Some people want to sell it to you for 10, but there's an outfit that will give you $100 a ton for carbon. Go right on. There they come, guys. Is there any doubt they grow? You know, look how dark green they are coming up. They're not yellow. You don't see insect damage. You know, right now we're all non-GMO. For 6 years, we're all naked seed. For 15 years, we've not used an insecticide or fungicide. We don't need to. Enough beneficial insects. Next slide. Here we're planting into a big cover. Nice thing about this cover, a week before we plant, I take a soil sample out of the field. I send it to a lab. I ask them how much nitrogen they find in the soil. I don't care about the rest of the stuff. Just tell me how much nitrogen's there. That field had 212 pounds of nitrogen. Guess what that told David? We're not going to use any. I didn't sleep for about a month. I mean, I kept worrying about it. You know, it finally turned dark green. Next slide. There it comes. But look at the thatch. Look what we've got. Guess what we've got? Planted the 28th day of May. Instead of 112-day corn, it's 102-day corn, or it's 100-day corn, or it's 98-day corn. You know? My neighbor's corn is already 10 inches tall because it's conventional, been out a month. It's pea yellow. You know? It's cold, he's having a hard time with it. This soil temperature that day was 72 degrees. We went over to his field, it was 69. That's why his corn was struggling. When you get a cover crop like this and the soil warms up, even though it gets cold, it won't warm up or it won't cool off because of that cover. Guess what else happens? Go ahead, next slide. Well, here's another cover crop. You know, here we have sorghum Sudan. We have cowpeas. We have radishes down here. This is Persilia, which is really a neat plant. It'll build soil. It loosens the soil. One plant that high will have roots 65 inches deep. That's why we use it. It's a fine root, but it goes deep. It's a great thing to make honey out of, you know. Next slide.
We've got a few minutes, Dave.
Oh, okay. Some interesting things we're doing. You know, you can do this after you build the soil health. So this happens to be grain sorghum. There's a cover crop underneath there. There's 5 or 10 different things. But 2 years ago, I got this wild idea. I don't make any money off my cover crops other than save fertilizer. What could I plant that I could harvest? So I bought some, they call it Milo out in South Dakota. So I brought it in, planted it, 74-day Milo, had 1,000 pounds of seed per acre. It had 14.5% protein, fed it to the hogs, no supplement needed, and still had a cover crop underneath. Guess what? Got livestock, guess what you could do? Next slide. So here's the one I wanted to show you. My conventional neighbor's corn, look at it. It's already got 270 pounds of nitrogen on it. It's showing nitrogen deficiency. We just had an inch of rainfall event an hour earlier. Look at this soil. It's 91 degrees here. It's 78 over there. At 99 degrees, all living things quit moving in the soil. It's too hot. This summer, his soil was 130 degrees for a week and a half, every day. I think that's enough for now. Any questions for right now? Yes, sir.
So, I like the idea of crimping. We're in mid-Michigan, we got rocks everywhere. The crimper's going to get ruined or could be damaged by that crimper, and then every time there's a rock and there's a hump, the rye doesn't get crimped. It's just a void right there. So we've gone ahead and tried and done the bush hog thing, and did not see the results we wanted with the bush hog on rye.
Right.
And it's almost like the rye restarted again.
Yes. Yeah.
So we haven't found that avenue.
I guess I could tell you have to pick them up. But I understand the situation. But, you know, if you can get them picked up once, you'll probably never see them again because you're not going to do any tillage. You know. And some of these rollers, like a 9J or some of these bigger rollers that have bigger diameters, will work a lot better. If you happen to have rocks, I would suggest you use multiple size rollers rather than trying to get a 20-foot roller, and when the rock rolls over it, the whole 20-foot lifts up. You know, if you had 5-foot rollers or 4 5-foot rollers, then it wouldn't be a big deal, you know.
Okay, we're going to take a little break and head outside with MSU Extension. And I think this Rainfall Simulator was going to put a lot of what we just saw in perspective. Then we'll come back in and continue on.